The night was cold and dark, the kind that wraps around you like a shroud. In a small village near Seville, a priest named Diego Diaz knelt before the altar, his voice trembling as he whispered the words of his sermon. "God did not die for the Castilians," he murmured, the words barely audible over the flicker of the candles. But in the back of the church, a shadowy figure had heard. The next morning, Diego was gone, dragged away by the inquisitors to face the wrath of the Holy Office. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the Spanish Inquisition was a force to be feared. It wasn't just about hunting down heretics. It was about controlling every aspect of religious life. From the grand celebrations of Corpus Christi to the sermons preached in small village churches, the Inquisition had a hand in it all. Bishops were supposed to be in charge of public devotions, but the Inquisition often stepped in to ensure that things didn't get out of hand. One of the most common issues was the credulity about visions of the Virgin Mary. People often claimed to have seen her, and the Inquisition was quick to investigate. They didn't want the masses to be misled by false visions or overly zealous preachers. For example, a group of young nobles in Toledo once formed a group dedicated to the belief that the body of the Virgin was contained within the Holy Sacrament. The Inquisition quickly put a stop to this, rebuking them for their misguided beliefs. But the Inquisition's reach extended beyond just religious practices. They also controlled the content of plays, especially those performed during the feast of Corpus Christi. Writers had to get their scripts approved by the Inquisition, which sometimes led to conflicts. Lope de Vega, one of the most famous playwrights of the Golden Age, managed to avoid trouble until 1801, but others weren't so lucky. The Inquisition required changes to plays and sometimes banned them altogether, though they were careful not to comment on the overall morality of the theater. Sermons were another major concern. The spoken word was a powerful tool in the Counter-Reformation, especially since many people couldn't read. The Inquisition frequently intervened to ensure that sermons were orthodox and didn't contain any heretical ideas. Bishops often welcomed this help, as they didn't have the resources to control their clergy. A Cistercian friar in Toledo once claimed that the glories of Mary were greater than those of the sacrament, and the Inquisition had to step in to correct him. The Inquisition also dealt with foreigners. Spain's empire brought many outsiders into the country, but the inquisitors were wary of them. They believed that foreigners, especially Protestants, could bring heretical ideas. In 1560, 2 Englishmen were burned at the stake in Seville for their Protestant beliefs. One of them, Nicholas Burton, was a ship's master whose cargo was confiscated by the authorities. Foreigners who showed disrespect to Spanish religious practices, like not removing their hats during processions, could be arrested and brought before the Inquisition. The Inquisition's influence was felt even in the Canary Islands, a regular port of call for English traders. Between 1586 and 1596, English sailors were often persecuted, and some were burned at the stake. But as time went on, the Inquisition became more lenient. By the 17th century, many foreigners, including Englishmen, were allowed to convert to Catholicism and live in Spain without much trouble. Despite its fearsome reputation, the Inquisition's impact was limited. Spaniards had to deal with many other authorities, like secular lords, royal officials, and church personnel. The inquisitors were just one of many forces in their lives, and their influence was often felt only during their periodic visits. For most people, the Inquisition was a distant, shadowy presence, something to be feared but rarely encountered. But for those who crossed its path, like Diego Diaz, the consequences were swift and severe. The night was still cold and dark, and the shadow of the Inquisition loomed over the land, a reminder of the power it held over the hearts and minds of the people. In a world where control depended on people coming into contact with authority, the Inquisition's impact on ordinary people in Spain can be understood by looking at how often and where the inquisitors actually showed up. In Catalonia, for example, inquisitors hardly ever visited during the early 1500s. Even in the latter half of the century when they did visit, it was mostly in the big cities and only once every 10 years. People in the countryside were lucky if they ever saw an inquisitor in their entire lives. In some areas, the Inquisition had no presence for the entire 300 years it existed. Even in the big cities, the Inquisition's influence was limited. In Toledo, for instance, the the Inquisition was mostly active in the city itself, with very little impact in the surrounding countryside. This pattern is similar in other regions like Catalonia, Toledo, and Galicia, where the Inquisition's social control was minimal. Over time, people in Spain got used to the Inquisition because it didn't really affect their daily lives. There were some protests in places like Aragon and Catalonia, but there were no widespread demands to get rid of the Inquisition until the Enlightenment. In some cities, the Inquisition was even welcomed because it offered a way to resolve conflicts. For example, a wife in Manresa threatened to report her husband to the Inquisition if he didn't stop mistreating her. A mother in La Bispal encouraged her friends to denounce her son to the Inquisition during an argument. People would go to the Inquisition to solve problems, much like people today might go to the police. However, the Inquisition didn't have a lasting impact on people's religious beliefs. After 200 years, Spaniards could still be as irreligious as ever. For instance, in 1676, a police officer named Manuel Sanchez and his friends mocked a religious service in a chapel, showing that people could be disrespectful even in the presence of the Inquisition. Many people resented the Inquisition for different reasons. First, it was a policing body, and people generally don't like being policed. They would curse the Inquisition when angry, but these outbursts were often just out of habit or when drunk. Second, the Inquisition often clashed with other authorities, especially in regions like Catalonia, where it was seen as a foreign and unwelcome presence. Third, the inquisitors were mostly Castilians who couldn't speak the local languages, making them even more alien to the rural communities. In places like Galicia, the Inquisition was almost unknown. In the Diocese of Ourense, it only functioned for a total of 16 months during the entire 17th century. Even in the heart of Castile, where the Inquisition had better communication, most of the people it dealt with were from the cities, not the countryside. One interesting case is that of Domingo de Chaves, a 65-year-old beggar who was arrested in Madrid for saying he wasn't a Christian. After a conversation with a parish priest, he was sent to the Inquisition in Toledo. Domingo had a fascinating life, having traveled all over Europe and served in different armies. The Inquisition heard his story and let him go without punishment, showing that even when the Inquisition did act, it often dealt with minor issues rather than significant religious matters. By the 1530s, the problem of people secretly practicing Judaism, Judaizers, had largely disappeared. By the 1540s, conversos, former Jews who had converted to Christianity, were rarely seen in Inquisition trials. Anti-Semitism still existed, but it was more a matter of prejudice than active persecution. Some people even argued that most conversos were now good Christians, showing that the fear and suspicion of the past were fading away. In the 1500s and 1600s, the Inquisition in Spain was a time of fear and suspicion, especially for the conversos, or converted Jews. Many of these people had been forced to convert to Christianity to avoid persecution, but some still held on to their Jewish beliefs and practices in secret. The Inquisition, a powerful religious court, was always on the lookout for anyone who might be secretly practicing Judaism. In 1528, a man in Catalonia was arrested for distributing a manuscript that accused the Inquisition of lying, murdering, and abusing people, including women in prison. This wasn't just a crime against the Inquisition. It was also against the law to spread such slander. In 1567, in Badajoz, a notice was posted that warned, "The property of every new Christian is at risk, and in 6 years, not a single one will be left to arrest." This shows that there were groups of families who secretly kept their Jewish traditions alive, generation after generation. However, most conversos seemed to be well integrated into Spanish society. When an inquisitor from Cuenca was asked to visit his district in 1570, he chose to go to areas with Moriscos Muslims who had converted to Christianity rather than Castile, where he believed there were no heretics. In Freginal de la Sierra, a town in Extremadura, most people were conversos, and they conveniently swore to each other's clean Christian background. The inquisitor found that over 400 people had given false witnesses to prove their Christian lineage. Many conversos also managed to travel to the Americas, despite the Inquisition's watchful eye. Despite this integration, there were still some conversos who practiced Jewish traditions in secret. These people, called Judaizers, often didn't practice full Jewish customs like circumcision or celebrating major holidays, but they kept some traditions alive. In 1588, a group of Judaizers was discovered in Quintana de la Orden, a town in La Mancha. They had managed to preserve Jewish rituals and prayers for generations, even without access to Jewish texts or synagogues. Similar cases were found in other parts of Spain, like in Toledo and Granada, where many Judaizers were women who passed down these traditions to their children. The Inquisition's understanding of what it meant to be a Judaizer was often outdated. By the 1600s, the Edicts of Faith, which listed the signs of Judaizing, described practices that hadn't been common for a century. For example, they talked about keeping the Sabbath, circumcising children, and using Jewish names, which were no longer relevant. This made it easier for the Inquisition to accuse people based on outdated information, often on the testimony of uninformed witnesses. The integration of conversos into Spanish society was evident in places like Granada, where families involved in the Inquisition's trials continued to hold important positions in the city council and high court. Even though many of their relatives were punished, the men kept their jobs and positions, showing that the limpieza, purity of blood rules were often ignored. The situation changed in the late 1580s when a large number of Portuguese conversos, who had initially fled to Portugal, began to return to Spain. Portugal had a large Jewish community that had been forced to convert in 1497, and they faced persecution in the 1530s when the Portuguese Inquisition was established. Many of these Portuguese conversos, who had not fully integrated into Portuguese society, returned to Spain, where they faced new scrutiny from the Inquisition. The Inquisition's focus on Portuguese conversos became more intense in the 1600s. In 1625, an auto de fe, a public ceremony where the Inquisition punished heretics in Cordoba, included 39 Portuguese out of 45 Judaizers. In 1627, another auto in Cordoba featured 58 Judaizers, all of whom were Portuguese. These events highlight the growing presence of Portuguese conversos in Spain and the Inquisition's increased attention to them. The Portuguese conversos who returned to Spain were often involved in commerce and the professions, unlike the earlier conversos who had integrated into rural life. This made them stand out and attracted suspicion. In the Cuenca area, for example, the new immigrants were traders and money dealers, and their success in business led to envy and accusations. The return of Portuguese conversos to Spain marked a shift in the experience of Sephardic Jews. Before 1492, many conversos and Jews had left Spain, and the memory of their homeland, Sepharad, remained strong among the exiles. This sense of identity helped shape the culture of Jewish communities outside Spain, who often combined Spanish and Portuguese traditions. Even 100 years after the expulsion, Jews in Tunis still called themselves the community of the exile, and maintained separate synagogues and cemeteries. The Inquisition's pursuit of Portuguese conversos in Spain continued into the 1700s, with many of the accused being of Portuguese origin. The story of the conversos and the Inquisition is a complex one, marked by fear, persecution, and the struggle to preserve one's identity in a hostile environment. The yearning for Sepharad, the old name for Spain, was a powerful force that brought many Jews back to the land of their ancestors. Despite knowing the risks of facing the Inquisition, hundreds of Jews returned to the Iberian Peninsula. They were driven by a deep desire to live in a cultural environment that was part of their heritage, and many were also part of a vast mercantile network across Western Europe. They could cross the land borders or enter through Portugal without much trouble, but some, like Baltasar Lopez, later regretted their decision. Baltasar was arrested in Santiago in 1677 and wished he had stayed in Bayonne, France, where he could live freely as a Jew. The return of these immigrants brought new challenges for the Inquisition. The royal family, especially Philip III, saw the value in tolerating wealthy Portuguese Jews. In 1602, the Portuguese offered a huge sum of 1,860,000 ducats to the king, along with gifts to royal ministers, in exchange for a general pardon for Jewish practices. The Jews were reportedly worth 80 million ducats in total, showing their immense wealth. The king, facing financial difficulties, accepted the offer and sought a papal decree for the pardon. The decree was issued on August 23, 1604, and published on January 16, 1605, leading to the release of 410 prisoners from the Portuguese tribunal. This pardon, however, was only a temporary reprieve. The Inquisition resumed its activities in both Portugal and Spain. In 1628, when Portuguese prelates proposed new measures against New Christians, the Jews paid another large sum to Philip III, allowing them to leave for Spain and other parts of Europe. This emigration was a significant loss for Spain, as the New Christians were crucial to the kingdom's economy. They were involved in trade, shipping, and finance, and their contributions were vital to the crown. The New Christian merchants argued that they were the financial backbone of the crown, sending ships to the East Indies, supporting Brazil's sugar industry, and maintaining trade with colonies in Africa and the Americas. They claimed that their emigration was benefiting other European cities like Rouen, Bordeaux, and Nantes. The Spanish authorities recognized the importance of these merchants and tried to keep them in the peninsula. After the first state bankruptcy of Philip IV's reign in 1626, Portuguese financiers filled the void left by the Genos bankers, despite protests from contemporaries. One critic, Pellicer de Assau, argued that using Portuguese financiers only made things worse. He said that since most Portuguese merchants were Jews, they often established their main trading houses in Flanders and northern cities, which benefited the Dutch and other heretics rather than Spain. Despite these criticisms, the Prime Minister, the Count Duke of Olivares, saw the value in using Jewish finance to restore the monarchy's fortunes. He modified the laws of purity in 1623, marking a significant break with official anti-Semitism. In 1634 and 1641, he even tried to negotiate with exiled Jews to return to Spain under guarantees that would reverse the negative consequences of their expulsion. However, the influence of the New Christians did not come without consequences. Manuel Fernandez Pinto, a wealthy financier who had lent Philip IV 100,000 ducats, was brought to trial by the Inquisition in 1636 and had to pay a hefty fine of 300,000 ducats. Juan Nunes Saravia, another prominent financier, was denounced in 1630 and eventually fined 20,000 ducats after being tortured. His brother, Enrique, was also fined over 300,000 ducats. The Inquisition continued to target wealthy New Christians, leading to their financial ruin and the loss of their good name. After 1640, the situation for Portuguese financiers in Spain became even more difficult. The revolt of Portugal against Madrid and the fall of Olivares in 1643 left them without protection. Diego de Saravia, a relative of Juan, was tried in 1641 and had to pay 250,000 ducats in gold, silver, and coin. Manuel Enrique, an elderly financier, was arrested in 1646, and another financier was tried in 1647. The Inquisition also targeted the wealthy banking family of Esteban Luis de Amante, confiscating over 100,000 ducats of property. The 1650s saw a wave of arrests and trials that terrorized the Portuguese converso community in Madrid. Many families were forced to flee, and the Inquisition's actions led to bankruptcies and a collapse of confidence in the financial system. The diarists living in Madrid during this period noted the widespread fear and the flight of prominent families. The Cardoso brothers, who administered taxes in several provinces, fled to Amsterdam with 200,000 ducats in wool and 250,000 in gold to escape the Inquisition. The diarist was concerned about the practice of not punishing false witnesses, which allowed people to ruin innocent lives. The Inquisition's actions had severe economic consequences. The arrest of financiers like Francisco Diaz Mendes Brito and Fernando de Montesinos Tellez, who had vast fortunes, led to their ruin and the flight of their families. Montesinos, a prominent banker, was fined but allowed to keep most of his wealth. He eventually moved to Amsterdam to practice Judaism openly, while his sons continued to serve the crown. The government and the Inquisition eventually agreed to differentiate between a financier's personal property and their business assets, which helped prevent the complete collapse of the financial system. The Inquisition continued to target high-profile financiers. Francisco Silo, an administrator of taxes in Malaga, was among those condemned in 1654. Francisco López Pereira, an administrator in Granada, also faced the Inquisition but had his case suspended. Diego Gomez de Salazar, a fervent Judaizer and administrator of the tobacco monopoly in Castile, was reconciled in 1664, and most of his family faced condemnation. The story of the new Christians in Spain is one of resilience, economic importance, and the constant threat of persecution. Despite their contributions to the kingdom, the Inquisition and the complex political and religious landscape of the time made their lives precarious and often tragic. The story of the conversos, or Jews who converted to Christianity, in Spain during the 17th century, is a tale of complex identities, resilience, and the enduring power of heritage. Despite the official policies of the Inquisition and the statutes of limpieza laws that aim to keep out those with Jewish or Muslim ancestry, many conversos rose to positions of great influence. They navigated a world of contradictions, where they could achieve high social and economic status while secretly maintaining their Jewish faith. One such figure was Manuel Cortizos de Villasante, a financier from Valladolid who, despite the laws against Jewish ancestry, became a knight, a lord, and a key member of the royal treasury. His life was a testament to the limited impact of the limpieza statutes in practical affairs. However, after his death in 1650, it was revealed that he had been a secret Jew and had even been buried according to Jewish rites. This discovery could have ruined his family, but their influence and status protected them. His son Sebastian even became the Spanish ambassador to Genoa, and another son, Manuel José, continued his father's work as a royal financier, eventually becoming a marquis. The story of the conversos is also one of persecution. Despite their achievements, many faced the harsh scrutiny of the Inquisition. Luis Marques Cardoso, a high-ranking tobacco administrator, and Francisco Baez Eminent, a leading Portuguese financier, were both arrested and tried for practicing Judaism in secret. These arrests highlight the ongoing tension between the conversos' public success and the Inquisition's relentless pursuit of those it suspected of heresy. The influence of Portuguese Jews in Spain brought a new vitality to the converso community. Their more active practice of Judaism helped to create a distinct Judeo-converso identity, which spread beyond Spain to Western Europe. This identity was rooted in a strong sense of Sepharad, the Hebrew name for Spain, and a deep connection to their Iberian heritage. Even in exile, many conversos continued to feel a profound bond to their homeland, as seen in the works of philosophers and writers like Isaac Cardoso and Enriquez Gomez. Cardoso, who left Spain in 1648 to live as a Jew in Venice, wrote influential works that blended philosophical ideas with his Jewish heritage. His book, The Excellences of the Jews, was a defense of Judaism and a critique of the Inquisition, written in Spanish to reach his fellow conversos. Enriquez Gomez, despite his conversion to Judaism in France, returned to Spain and wrote in Spanish, feeling a deep pull to his roots and the only land that could provide an audience for his work. His criticism of the Inquisition, including its practice of limpieza, reflects the deep resentment many conversos felt towards the institution. The story of the conversos also extends to the intellectual realm. Men like Isaac Orobio de Castro, who fled to Amsterdam after a close escape from the Inquisition, contributed to the rich intellectual life of the Sephardic diaspora. Their experiences in Spain influenced their thinking and writing, bridging the gap between the Old World and the New. By the end of the 17th century, the Inquisition's focus on the conversos had waned in most parts of Spain, but not in all. In Mallorca, the persecution of conversos surged in the late 1600s, long after it had declined elsewhere. This unique situation reflects the island's distinct history and the different paths taken by different regions within Spain. The conversos' journey is a testament to the human spirit's ability to thrive and adapt, even in the face of great adversity. Their legacy is one of resilience, cultural richness, and the enduring power of heritage, which continued to influence the world even after they left the peninsula. Their story is a reminder that identity is not easily erased, and that the bonds of culture and history can persist through generations.